Right now, you can tune in and not drop out. You can stay tuned and get excited about Chris Cataldi. He's from Genvid Technologies, then one of our sponsors at Beyond Games, and he wants to do a superstar session. Of course he does, because he's a blaming superstar, where he's expanding the audience, massively interactive live events, we call them Miles, and Facebook's rival Peak. How are you doing today, Chris?
I should unmute.
You're unmuted.
How's it going? Yes, I'm going great. And I have no excuse. I'm in New York, so it's beginning of my day.
Well, what a great start to your day. Take the floor. You've got about 20 minutes and I'll come back with Q&A.
Great. Can everyone see my screen okay? I assume that's a yes?
Absolutely.
Great. And I just need to do one more thing, which is make sure that you get my sound. Fantastic. So great. Thanks everyone for tuning in to my session about expanding the audience, massive interactive live events, and which we call Miles, and Facebook's rival Peak, which just ended in March of this year. My name is Chris Cataldi. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO of Genvid Technologies. I'll be talking a little bit about what this new construct that we've seen or observed, what we call Miles, and Facebook's rival Peak. If you're not familiar with Genvid Technologies, I want to give a brief background of who we are and where we come from, so you can kind of frame that accordingly, see why we've come up with the idea of Miles, and where that kind of comes from, and we'll do a deeper dive as much as possible as in 20 minutes we can do into rival Peak, which is one of the first examples of this new format that Facebook really launched last year, and some lessons we learned from it. And I hope I have some active Q&A at the end. So first of all, Genvid's been around for just over 5 years. We're headquartered in New York, but we have offices in Montreal, Santa Monica, Irvine, Berlin, and Tokyo. And the 4 co-founders of Genvid came from the games industry, specifically Square Enix. We were the kind of management of a company called Genvid Technologies, which was the cloud gaming subsidiary of Square Enix. And we focused on creating new experiences for the streaming world, games that can only be realized through the power of the cloud. And in 2016, we went independent to bring some of the ideas and a new set of technology to let that be accessible to the world via Genvid. We've attracted more than 70 people to us to make this possible, and we've been really fortunate to gain the financial support of some of the biggest institutional and strategic investors in the world. Amongst our advisors, we have Yuichi Wada, who's the former CEO of Square Enix, Matt Ball, who's one of the luminaries of interactive and linear media, Anna Sweet, game industry veteran who's currently the head of Bad Robot Games, JT Gleason, who's one of the first engineers at Twitch, and Andy Schneider, the former head of Live Gamer and SVP, former SVP of Disney Streaming, and we can go from there. So our vision, we believe that people love events, people love communal experiences, and most importantly, people love when their participation matters. And at Genvid, we're trying to power the next generation of these experiences across all types of genres, taking best practices of gaming, bringing it to the streaming of those games and linear media as well, and creating really cool interactive experiences that are only possible via what we call Miles. For Miles, the best way to think about this is to really be very specific to the words. So they're massive, they're interactive, they're live, and they're events. Massive in they can be anyone in the world can interact with them on any device. They're interactive, meaning you're watching or you're interacting makes a difference. They're live, meaning we're not watching pre-recorded things, and it's every second no one necessarily is in control of what's going on. And they're events, and when we talk about event, there's a level of polish and there's a level of structure there that is important to be able to consume the type of quality we want. The easiest way to think about this is games without the skill. And if you've ever yelled at a television while watching football, or you've ever told someone not to go into a room, imagine what would be the case if they listened to you. right? And you're yelling at the screen made a difference. You're not playing anymore. You're part of the audience, but you're part of the audience that makes a difference. And why do we think that, this is interesting? Where does this sit in terms of the pantheon of interactivity? And when thinking about the metaverse, and when thinking about Miles and how we see those two words coming together, as the former speaker said, there are a lot of definitions for metaverse. The way I see it is, the most sensory, immersive, digital online experience, right? And the minute we start thinking about it going that way, we realize that it's not necessarily in the near future that everyone's going to get access to that experience. And where we are today is we have an infrastructure and internet where everyone can log on, and consume video entertainment. Video games are the leader when it comes to interactivity, but when it comes to bringing interactivity to other genres, up until now, game developers haven't really had the tools to do it. And so instead of waiting 10 years, 15 years, 20 years for the infrastructure to catch up to have low latency interactivity and everyone jacked into the sensory immersion version of the metaverse, we want to kickstart that today using best practices from the game industry. We're bringing that to linear streaming platforms that everyone in the world can access now if they have moderate to good internet. And so with that, we're able to play around with a lot of what formerly would have been called game design principles when it comes to lean in, lean back experiences, more hardcore versus more casual. We can create all types of versions of interactivity that the individual as well as the group can interact with each other in cool and interesting different ways. And we can also leverage the power of the cloud, by which we mean unlimited unlimited resources when it comes to all different types of things with render, compute, processing, et cetera, and bring that through streaming to the wider world. And one really good example of that is what we were able to help nurture via Rival Peak. And I'm going to dive deeply into Rival Peak. But for those of you who didn't interact with Rival Peak, I have a 1-minute video just to show you a brief example of what it was, and I'll go from there. So that's a 1-minute kind of summary of Rival Peak. But at the end of the day, Rival Peak, the 10-second summary of it is it was a Facebook original product that was unique and to the Facebook platform. Anyone with a Facebook app or able to access the Facebook webpage could at any given time click a link, and without doing any kind of install, any kind of additional work on any device that could power Facebook, could interact with this live 24/7, 13-week experience. And it was really made through the vision of it was enabled by Facebook. We had Genvid 2 kind of really important studio partners, one being Pipeworks that did all of the development for the experience, and DJ2 Entertainment that did all of the narrative and show design. I'll talk a little bit what that means. We got some coverage about it both in the beginning, middle, and end. Rival Peak had at its core this idea of it's an interactive AI-driven reality television show that takes in the best of narrative design from Telltale veterans and the best of streaming and fan interaction through the power of the Facebook platform, and putting those together. And we learned a whole bunch along the way, but every single thing I just mentioned was kind of cutting edge when it comes to the AI behind it, when it comes to the interactive features that we put on Facebook, when it comes to the narrative that tied it all together. I'll talk a little bit about some of the key learnings we got from it, as well as some of the core components of it. We had 12 really amazing characters in Rival Peak, all with really diverse backgrounds when it came to demographic, when it came to story background, when it came to professions, you name it. And through every single interaction that a viewer had, whether it was watching the stream, whether it was going and reaching out and touching and supporting the characters along the way, made a difference in multiple ways, both granular, the second to second, daily, in terms of the trajectory that the individual and the groups went, as well as the macro, which is at the end of the day, who stayed and who left. And while it was pitched originally to the audience as a survivor type experience, it turned more into a lost type experience, by which I mean, yes, there were reality TV elements to it, but it had a lot more kind of deep, rich narrative where nothing was exactly what it seemed, and people had a little bit more to decipher along the way. And at the end, viewers scored over 1 billion points for all the various contestants. And, you know, each of the contestants had both their redeeming qualities as well as, you know, shortcomings that we learned as we went through the story. Towards the end, we released some stats around the interaction with Rival Peak that talked about 100 million minutes viewed throughout the Facebook platform, and that's just outside of the app itself. We had a lot of interactivity and stuff in there as well. And along the way, for an original IP, we found that it was through adding some specific abilities for viewers to interact more than what we started with that really drove that growth, and adding a couple of things I'll talk about throughout the stream. We grew absolutely original IP by the last week, 55 times just in that week what it was in the first week, and that growth was pretty substantial. In terms of what the user breakdown was for Rival Peak, some of the things I think are really interesting for us. You know, the idea of a mile is neither a traditional core game, nor is it something that is, you know, meant to be just a casual experience. And the viewer demographics really help to bolster this idea, right? So in terms of our top 5 countries, in no particular order, we United States, Mexico, and Brazil, India, and the Philippines. Very big viewerships in all of those countries. In terms of its gender breakdown, it neither fit into a casual or a traditional AAA breakdown there. In terms of its age reach, we witnessed, you know, a very big majority in its 18 to 34 age range, but a very, you know, substantial older demographic as well, including some, you know, the 55 and plus, almost at, above 15%. And it was overly mobile. And this speaks, I think, a lot to the power of the mobile experience of Facebook and its reach there as well. In terms of the ways that audience interacted. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways that were shown in that video that a viewer could make a difference. But what we found that was kind of counterintuitive to all of the best practices up until now is the viewers mostly interacted with 2 things. One was the story, the dialogues with the AI contestants to see their journey and kind of help them along the way, as well as the events. And by events, we mean not votes, but ability to go and help the contestants more directly. And then votes, which, you know, when people think about interactive streaming on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, et cetera, most of it comes through votes because that's an easy way to channel mass input into a summary. Those tended to be the least popular when it came to our users. And, you know, votes when Rival Peak literally meant, you know, what are we going to do in terms of, you know, each day the viewers were given the ability to help or hurt the contestants en masse. And then, you know, every few minutes, the AI were asking the users, what should I do next? And the users could go ahead and tell them what they wanted to do. When it came to things like events, we brought in game-like elements, whether it was match 3 or memory activities that would come in and actually augment, depending on how well you did in these games, more casual interactions, the output to the contestant would be greater or less. As well as along the way, if a contestant had a problem they had to solve, the viewer could interact and make that faster or easier or better, the outcome. Rival Peak itself was a massive world. And so we had to, mid-season, bring in maps that could show where the various AI were, so you can get some contextual understanding where things were. And we also brought in things like achievements and tribute challenges later in the season to give those core viewers more engagement, so that they could, max out the leaderboards, as well as, kind of compete with each other as well. Genvid, just give you some framework of what we did behind it. We did kind of all of the overseeing of the co-development of this with Pipeworks. We did all the server deployment. We had 13 different servers, one for each AI contestant that was streaming 24/7 via Unity instance to Facebook. And we also had multiple AI server instances that were in charge of doing the AI offloading that to specific instance. And we also made sure the streams are on 24/7 everywhere in the world. And so that's kind of where we focused. Rival Peak as its heart had two major components. One was the 24/7 stream, and it was a Rival Peak weekly show that Will Wheaton headed up for us that did wrap up, but also gave more insight into the lore. That narrative that the viewers really interacted a lot with was developed, on the fly. No one knew how Rival Peak was going to end. And so each week there was a very kind of structured narrative that we wanted to have, but we needed to see where the audience was going to take it. And the way we did that was we had a weekly cadence where we were summing up what the results of the show viewers contributions were, and towards the end of the week we were cutting off certain branches and then focusing on the higher likelihood ones, and then literally at the beginning of the next week doing a full day of production, and then eventually rolling that out live to the world 2 days later. And so the viewers were making a difference not only to the AI but also to that larger narrative. In terms of our biggest learning points from Rival Peak, in addition to the kind of very surprising demographic found, is we really needed to bring in a lot of explanation of what viewers could do and how they could get onboarded, both the people outside of the stream, but also once they got on board. We brought in about the third or fourth week Concierge streamers that were up and coming that could explain what exactly Rival Peak was to their audiences on Facebook who weren't used to these kind of experiences. And we saw, very big retention from that. And we also, as I said earlier, brought in new features throughout the experience that could let viewers have a better understanding of the world around it, but also catch up to the weekly Rival Peak shows that they might have missed along the way. Again, the key takeaways that we got from Rival Peak, and I'm limited by, and I think I'm probably slightly over time, was that Facebook itself has over 2 billion users, and they're not used to having this level of interactive experience with the content that are watching, and so it's a fairly green field, and there's a lot we can do with it. The diverse nature of the audience, whether it's regional, age, gender, you name it, they were all represented in terms of our audience, and they were fairly compelling. And up until now, we've been stuck in the voting construct. And as game developers, with having more ability to interact with viewers, we were able to see a lot of more interactions that weren't just voting. So those are some of the key takeaways there. And if I have any more time, Kelly, I'm happy to answer questions, but I assume I'm probably slightly over.
Yeah, we definitely have a few questions for you. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely incredible. The big question is there going to be another season of Rival Peak coming soon, or are you going to be focusing on other projects?
Genvid's always focused on other projects. I think the main takeaway from Rival Peak season 1 was that there's a lot of opportunity here in the space, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see more in the future, but I can't speak to specifics on if it's going to be a second season of Rival Peak, if it's going to be other things using the same kind of framework. but there's expect to see more in this space.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee asks, maintaining consistent narrative in games where players have considerable agency is a huge challenge. How did you surmount this? And is there a natural limit to the levels of choices watchers, players can be offered in these strong story-led experiences?
Yeah, I think the answer here is absolutely. I think less choice at some times is more. If you think about what is most encapsulating when we're watching linear video movies, we have no choice. Right, as viewers, we have one choice, which is to watch or not, and it's that thinking about it, the artistic decisions that have been made on our behalf is quite compelling, and so, but still knowing that your input makes a difference. I think this is almost a difficult balance to do. But what I think we found from Rival Peak is having any input at all made a big difference, and it doesn't need to be to the level of player. Right, and up until now, it's been kind of a Boolean and/or. Right, it's either you are in full agency or you have nothing. And what we found was having some agency made a huge difference.
Yeah, good answer. And really, I mean, Rival Peak is just insane. It's so good. And it's fast. That's what's important, I think, is that it's not something that is like a slow process. It's moving constantly and it's snowballing as a story. And I think that that's what gives people that much agency to be able to get into the experiences that they're in. And then, I'm being a metaverse dreamer here and a massive meta nerd again, but I kind of see that the beauty of Rival Peaks is that it is a world that will just continue to unfold to the point where we want to live in it. And then you're going to have to help us to live in that space.
Exactly.
And that's on you. I've got a fantastic question, which is, do you see other non-game platform companies like, say, Netflix creating similar experiences in the future? And have they already been in touch? I guess you're not going to say, but we sort of want to know.
I mean, I think you'd be, foolish to think that the biggest platforms in the world when it comes to content or user base aren't thinking about ways to interact and have their user base interact with their content more. I can't speak to who we are and aren't talking about unless they let me. But, I think, yes, a lot more is coming in this space. And, it's very exciting times for us and seeing what other people do with it as well.
What do you think is the biggest challenge that you came across in creating these experiences? The content, the team, the technology, which is the...
I mean, you're speaking to a startup founder who's a crazy person, right? So what
you're all crazy at Genvid. That's why we love you.
I think this all happened. We went from signing the paperwork to delivering it to Facebook in less than 7 months. Wow. That's all development.
That's crazy.
And if it weren't for the level of professionalism and creativity that our partners had, as well as Facebook for greenlighting this, I don't think it would have been possible. So I think doing new things on a difficult timeline and having it all work at a global level, the parameters around that were probably the most difficult. I could go more granular in, doing interactive storytelling where no one necessarily controls it, doing things on a weekly cadence, having absolute full production live during COVID. I could go through any one of those things, right? And Will's team and Will himself was amazing in his passion for this kind of storytelling as well. You take any one of those elements out of it and it would have been an impossible thing to do. And so, yeah, I mean, lots of difficult things. But as I put in my summary, it's so new that you could either look at that novelty as a challenge or as an opportunity, and I choose the latter.
Do you promise to come back and give us a deeper dive, Chris? Because
absolutely,
the information that you've generated in this short chat today is just monster. It's absolutely killer.
I'll talk your ear off. Yeah.
Yes, please come back next time. Thank you so much. And thank you for being one of our sponsors as well. It's a real honor to sort of host you this afternoon, especially with these crazy eyebrows. I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your amazing New York morning and wish you a really great rest of your week. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.